Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime?
Why is it a question?
I don't know. Are we still doing this?
Doing what?
A podcast?
Yes?
Obviously. It's just a joke.
I think if we weren't, you'd have left like 30 minutes ago.
Oh, I would have left much sooner than 30 minutes ago.
You wouldn't have come over.
You're right. I wouldn't have.
Hayden, what do you know about the victim selection of serial killers with regards to race?
Okay. So how does race impact victim selection?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know if I know. If you were to ask me that question and phrase it more generally, like how do perpetrators select their victims in crimes of murder or serial murder, I think I would probably point to the very easy trope of men killing women, either because of impotency or frustration or anger at the fairer sex. But when it comes to race, I don't know if that's motivated by hatred, by bigotry, by racism, which this is only somewhat related. But did you see where the secretary of a school in Arkansas wrote about tell that N-word he better not come back here and pray that the sun never sets on his back because he'll be dead and he better leave Lulu alone?
No.
I think this just was like released yesterday or the day before. And so, I don't know, maybe they're motivated by racial bigotry and hatred, maybe by feelings of inadequacy. I think it matters what race the perpetrator is. Although we know that most serial murderers are white and male. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's a really good question that I don't have an answer to.
Typically, white serial killers kill white victims and black serial killers kill black victims. And this country has a history of failing to prioritize victims who are not white.
So from what I'm understanding, is that victims of color receive less attention than their white counterparts.
Correct.
And because of that, and due to the fact that most murder occurs intraracially, we know of fewer serial murderers of color because their victims largely go more ignored than white victims.
I don't want to say ignored entirely, but they don't end up having as much media pressure put on them. They often can have a lower socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. And so for other compounding reasons, they aren't even necessarily tied together as serialized killings.
Right.
They're treated as standalone because they're not putting as much into them. They're not tracking the similarities in MOs or use of weapons or that types of thing.
Okay. So there's a direct correlation between race and class and the amount of effort that's placed into an investigation.
Yes. Not always, but yes. Well, nothing is absolute.
I feel like I'm trying to give you a through line and you're like, no.
I said yes.
I know, but then always. You were like, but no.
I said not always.
Okay.
Nothing can be said that is a 100% blanket that covers everything.
No, and we know that. We're reasonable people. I don't think that you would advocate that any one thing is an unbendable rule.
So if it's not clear, my case is going to
be explicitly about white people. The one exception to the rule, it's actually interracial crime.
Maybe. Only time will tell. South Central Los Angeles, July 3rd, 2010.
Okay.
4th of July weekend. Very America, much patriotic. It's a Saturday, so I imagine a lot of barbecues are being held. You can picture the scene, right?
Yeah, patriotism.
Burgers and beer.
Hot dogs. A little too charred.
Lemonade.
Budweiser.
Well, let's not name drop.
Oh,
I said beer.
Oh, hops-based alcohol of a 6% content variety.
Exactly. American flag swimsuits.
Oh,
Watermelon.
Old Navy shirts.
Okay, yeah.
Specifically Old Navy patriotic shirts.
Mm-hmm. We get it. We can all picture.
Yeah. And this is in LA, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if they do 4th of July differently.
In what way?
I don't know. They're LA. They're Los Angeles.
I don't think they do.
Okay.
My grandparents that live in Arkansas now, they lived in an LA suburb, basically.
Yeah, but when?
From the late 80s until about 2007.
Okay.
And they throw annually a 4th of July thing in Arkansas.
Wow.
So we've set the stage, right? Everybody's excited and American and looking forward to fireworks.
Okay.
Detective Cliff Shepard receives a call from his partner, Detective Paul Coulter, asking if he wants to come into work.
Who would say yes?
Well, it's a holiday weekend, right? So Shepard is like, what's the tea, honeybee, to paraphrase.
Also, I guess there's probably overtime.
Well, Coulter tells him they've got a familial match to a killer that has been eluding them since the mid-'80s.
Oh, wow.
August 10th, 1985. Either two young men or a man walking his dog. Love a good discrepancy right out the gate.
Yeah, man or dog. It could be either.
They're cutting through the alley at West Gage Avenue.
How do you mix up a dog and a person?
How do you mix up like two young men? So like two teenage boys is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure. Or a man walking his dog. Like I don't know. But don't worry. The discrepancies, they
don't end there, huh?
They do not end there.
Got it.
Cutting through the alley when they notice an unmoving hand protruding from a discarded carpet amidst other garbage.
All I can see is just a hand. Like a hand that's cut off from a body.
No, it's connected to an arm. I don't think that this is the comedy part of the podcast.
Sorry. All I could see was this like dismembered hand in an alleyway. And I was like, well, yeah, that would be concerning.
Not dismembered. The police are notified, and it's basically just another day at work for them because at this point in time, LA was averaging 1,300 homicides annually.
Oh my God. How many deaths per day?
More than one.
More than two.
One detective fondly recalls that they'd be at the scene of a crime working on securing and processing it when they'd hear gunshots ring out. So they'd say, okay, I'll stay here and finish this one. Go get started on that one.
Oh, wow. What a sad portrait of 1980s LA when it came to criminality and law enforcement.
Specifically, South Central LA is where the majority of this case takes place. So they arrive on the scene and find the body of a Black female clothed with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest. Ugh. And the body is significantly decomposed.
In the rug? Or is this at the other place?
No, this was rolled in the carpet.
Okay.
That was just an anecdote that they dropped in there. That was not this specific scene.
Got it.
They estimate that she'd been there for right around 4 days. And while she had a purse by her head, there was no identification on or near her body. They did find a slip of paper in the purse with phone numbers on it, so they called the number. What they didn't find at the scene were any shell casings or any blood, so they believed that this was not where she was killed, only where her body was dumped and then covered with trash.
Like not even blood in the carpet?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure. So again, I'm just going to say right now, this murder in particular had a ton of discrepancies between the two primary sources I used. So one said that her clothes were on and intact. The other said that her shirt was pushed up and her pants were unzipped. One source said they called the numbers and spoke to her sister, who mentioned that she had a girlfriend and that their relationship could be contentious, while the other source said they called and spoke with her ex-girlfriend, who had been expecting her to come by to pick up her belongings, but she had never shown up.
Okay, that's several different accounts or several different details across 2 accounts that don't jive.
Right. Either way, using the phone numbers that they found in the purse, they were able to identify the woman as 29-year-old Deborah Jackson, mother of 3, cocktail waitress, helping to care for her grandmother. She had been staying with a couple who had taken her in, and the last time they had seen Deborah, she told them she needed to go take care of a debt she had.
Okay.
She left and never returned. She never said who she owed or what it was for. They had no other information other than a debt that she was going to go take care of.
And what was her profession? Did you say what her profession was?
She was a cocktail waitress.
Is there any knowledge on whether or not the supposed ex-girlfriend and the current girlfriend are the same person?
I understand them to be the same person.
Okay. And so when supposedly the sister describes their relationship as contentious.
That's my word, but yeah, that it could be, I don't know, volatile or...
Okay. Is the suggestion that it could be physical?
I am going to get there,
okay.
But based on what makes the most sense to me with everything that I know, I'm going to call her ex-girlfriend.
Okay. Are you going to tell us what the debt was, or do you know what the debt was?
She never said who she owed or what she owed for. They had no information other than she said she was going to go take care of a debt.
Okay. I'm concerned already by the idea of a debt that there's no kind of understanding or record of what debt it might be.
Mm-hmm. So they interviewed the ex-girlfriend who told them they had had an argument about a week prior, but she said Deborah had left and she hadn't seen her since. And she said the argument was non-violent. They looked into this ex and found nothing. No history of domestic violence or anything else that would indicate that she had killed Deborah. She permitted them to search her apartment. She was cleared after they found no signs of a struggle or gun or anything.
How quickly did they go see Deborah's ex-girlfriend? Because she'd already been dead for at least 4 days.
Right. So
it was easy to clean up a struggle in 4 days.
I guess that's fair. But she also had no history of domestic violence.
Okay. And
okay.
You are listen. You already made a big deal about how people of color, Black people, their cases, their criminal justice cases, gosh, I'm losing my ability to phrase, but that they aren't taken as seriously by authorities as their white counterparts.
That's fair. And I want to just add that
also queer.
Right. The one source that I saw that did like a reenactment of the interview with the girlfriend, in that source, the girlfriend was white. Nothing said that. The only space in which that existed for information was in a dramatization reenactment. So I don't know if that was the case, but then that adds another layer to the whole thing as well.
So we don't even know the ex-girlfriend's name.
Mm-mm.
Okay. All right, so she's not the killer here.
Right.
Thought you might be bringing me a female serial killer.
Not today. But next month is Women's Month, so...
Okay.
Probably still not then. The gun in question that had been used to kill Deborah was fairly uncommon. It was a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun, so it was small.
Okay. I'm not capable of visualizing what that might look like. I have no idea.
Right. Small.
Is it a hand? It's a handgun. You just said that, right?
Yes.
And it's semi-automatic?
Well, yes. Anything that you're not having to load the next.
Okay. Is a revolver semi-automatic? Or just guns that have clips?
Well, I don't think that a revolver is semi-automatic. I don't know. I think the ones where you have to...
and it pops out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. We are very knowledgeable about guns.
I guess come and take it, because I fucking don't even know what it is.
So anyway, the size of this handgun indicated that the shooter had to be pretty close to Deborah when they pulled the trigger. Maybe this was personal. The medical examiner found that she had cocaine in her system. So is it possible that this was a drug deal gone wrong? Or had the person she owed money to been unhappy with her for some reason?
Do we find out that she's participated in sex work at any point?
Yes.
Okay.
Or was this the work of the Southside Slayer?
The Southside Slayer?
Yeah, because there had been a number of Black women whose bodies were turning up that the police believed to all be linked to one killer.
No murderer deserves such a cool moniker.
Right.
The Southside Slayer?
Well, don't worry. We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end.
Okay. In my brain, I'm already starting to worry that this is going to be a case where I see disenfranchised sex workers being the primary victims of a serial serial killer?
So the Southside Slayer that they believed was operating in the area.
Okay.
Those victims had primarily been strangled, so they wondered if this was the guy switching up his modus operandi with Deborah. All of these victims had fallen on hard times in one way or another, many fighting addiction and financing their substance use through sex work.
Yeah. I had a bad feeling when you said debt and cocktail waitress and tumultuous relationships. And then also, I think it's more common for, and I have no factual basis for what I'm about to say, but I do think that women are more likely to engage in same-sex relationships as a form of protection and the removal of the threat of men. I think that women are more capable of maybe overlooking their sexual preference for emotional connection and emotional safety.
They probably also are very keenly aware of the danger that men pose.
Exactly.
So,
And
like
so-
physically, because if they're operating in an unregulated industry that very often devalues them, they probably understand humanity a hell of a lot better than any of us ever will.
Right.
So it's believed that they've got a serial killer at large in South Central Los Angeles. And while they'd been trying to keep this theory close to the chest, they decided it was time that people were aware. A press conference is held in September of 1985, or was it 86? And during that, it is not revealed exactly which neighborhoods or areas they think the killer is operating in. But what they do reveal is that they had not revealed until this moment that there were 13 victims, or was it 11, that they believed to have all been killed by this person.
How can there be so many discrepancies? Also, the difference between 11 murders and 13 murders, that's significant. That's 2. I mean, any is significant when we're talking about murder. So is this mixed reporting, or is this that the police department's unsure of the connections between these 13 or 11 different women?
It's probably that because, again, 1,300 homicides per year at this point. So they hold this press conference. They tell them about all these victims, and the public, who was entitled to this information, was furious that so many deaths had been kept from them. In layman's terms, this was a PR nightmare for the Los Angeles Police Department.
Well, they've had plenty of those.
They sure have. Let's get into it. Margaret Prescott, who immigrated to the United States from Barbados in 1962 as a teen and who had joined a protest less than 2 weeks after her arrival, which established her as a fierce civil rights activist almost immediately, responded to this press conference by founding the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders.
Is there an acronym?
No.
An initialism?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have a hard time keeping up with it in my brain.
That's it. She founded the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders, and she founded it to encourage law enforcement and policymakers to not only work on finding any and all parties responsible for these women's murders, but to discourage them from using the struggles in these women's lives as a way to vilify them or diminish the value of their lost lives. Margaret Prescott is a badass civil rights activist. This was by no means her only activism, but I didn't want to derail too far from the case in telling you about her. So definitely look her up if you have a chance. And if you don't know about her and the work that she has done.
Yeah, it sounds Margaret is doing the Lord's work.
The Lord's work, as we say.
Yeah, she's really, even today in 2025, it's not uncommon for us to see sex workers vilified in instances where they are the target, especially Black trans sex workers. And it's heartening to know that there was someone doing the hard work even then. And I say even then, like it was ages and ages ago. But the truth is, I mean, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. So good for you, Margaret. And thank you for holding it down.
With mounting pressure for LAPD, a task force was created.
Sorry, I always think of like stupid cheesy hero movies when they say task force.
Yeah, that's fair. August 12th, 1986, 2 days after the anniversary of Deborah's body being discovered, a man experiencing homelessness was in an alley sifting through trash when he noticed a foot. Police arrived on the scene and found a woman's body wrapped in a blanket with a mattress placed atop it. She was wearing a shirt that was maybe pushed up, similar to how Deborah's was, but also maybe was only wearing a sports bra, and she was either wearing shorts that had been unzipped, again, matching the state in which Deborah's body had been abandoned, but also maybe her shorts and underwear had been removed. I'm going to take this moment to point out that the discrepancies that I'm including are because at some point, obviously, someone points out that this would likely have all unfolded differently had the victims fit a different profile. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of breadcrumbing some of the argument that is made in support of that claim. They also determined that her body had been dumped. This was not the scene of the crime. One difference between Deborah's case and this case was that this victim had a piece of a man's shirt shoved in her throat.
Oh.
Likely to silence her screams.
Okay, that's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. She'd been shot in the chest twice, and it was determined later that the gun used to kill her was a .25 caliber. The angle of the gunshot wounds were very telling for the investigation because they indicated that she had been likely seated in the passenger side of a car and shot by the driver.
Okay. I guess I'm not sure how they would know that.
The trajectory.
Okay. I mean, I guess also it is leading me to think, well, why would she have been in the passenger seat of a car unless she were being picked up in a moment of sex work?
I definitely see where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Her fingerprints were used to identify her as 24-year-old single mother of 5, Henrietta Wright.
That is rough.
Mm-hmm.
A single mother of 5 at 24?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God. Okay.
Henrietta worked during the day in a cafeteria, and at night she was a cocktail waitress.
Did she work as a cocktail waitress in the same place that Deborah had?
I don't know. I feel like some of the details between these two cases get kind of jumbled together and treated as one.
Okay.
So I'm not necessarily even 100% sure that both of them were cocktail waitresses. One of them was probably a cocktail waitress, but maybe they both were, maybe they both weren't.
Okay. Do they have any connection outside of this?
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of. When they contacted her sister, she told police that Henrietta's home had burned down and she'd been living with her father, but that they had had a falling out due to conflicts over her use of drugs, which she had turned to as a means to cope with the turmoil of losing so much. And so as a result of their falling out, he had kicked her out of his house.
Ugh. And where were her 5 kids?
I don't know.
Okay.
She had subsequently been living on the streets, so they were unable to find out a lot of information about her final hours. Despite the similarities between Henrietta's and Deborah's murders, the police did not initially put these two cases together, beyond possibly attributing them to the South Side Slayer. But again, the use of a gun was a deviation from the MO believed to be used by the South Side Slayer.
What was his MO, this South Side Slayer?
Strangulation.
That's right. Okay. That would be a large leap in MO.
Right. It was after the bullets from their bodies were compared to one another that they realized they were both killed by the same gun and dumped within miles of each other.
Okay. So a strong connection is starting to form.
Mm-hmm.
But are they paying attention?
They are now that they've got the matching bullets.
Okay.
So I mentioned before that they held that press conference in either September of 1985 or September of 1986. Mm-hmm. One of the sources said that it was after Henrietta's body was found that they held the press conference, which was in August of 86. The other source said that the press conference took place in September of 85, which would have been 11 months before Henrietta's body had been located.
Okay.
The body of 23-year-old Barbara Ware was found on January 10th, 1987. She wanted to be a nurse, according to her stepmother, Diana. She remembered her as a very outgoing woman who wouldn't back down. She didn't know how Barbara would have ended up in this situation. She wasn't sure if she had fallen in with an unsavory unsavory crowd or gotten into drugs. The top half of Barbara's body was in a trash bag, and a gas tank from some type of vehicle was placed over her. So like the tank from a car or truck.
So her top half was covered with a trash bag, and then a fuel tank was placed on top of her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Weird. And was this body placed in an alleyway?
Probably.
Okay.
A phone call had come in from a man on a payphone saying he could only see the woman's legs under the trash. He told the dispatcher that he had seen a man driving a blue and white Dodge van who had dumped the body and that he had gotten the license plate off of it.
Okay, this man he's working. He's doing his job.
He relayed the plate number to them, and when they asked him his name, he wouldn't give it, saying he knew too many people and abruptly hung up.
I mean, a tip is still a tip.
After tending to the scene, they located the van at the church that it was registered to. The engine was still warm. Apparently, the keys to the van were readily available to anyone with the church, and they were kept in a drawer that was easily accessible. There was no log kept with information about when the van was being used or who was using it, so they did not have much to go off of with this lead. They did, however, notice when they were checking the van for evidence that the back of the van had a ladder next to the spare tire that obstructed the view of the license plate. So in order to see it, you'd have to be basically right on top of the van. And they found exactly zero evidence or indication that Barbara had ever been in the van. They were starting to question if
what kind of indication would they have?
Fibers, hair, blood. I mean, she was shot.
Okay. I guess if this fits with the prior cases where the victim was murdered elsewhere and then transported, I don't see why she might not have been transported in this van.
Right. They were looking for evidence of that.
Also, I don't even know what kind of evidence they used in the 1980s because I know they weren't using DNA. But I guess you could already do like fiber comparisons and things of that nature.
You know that they could do blood typing.
They could.
And this is 86. So we're like right on the brink of DNA. They were starting to question if this elusive caller wasn't the murderer, becoming more brazen.
Ooh.
They'd had their suspicions early on because there was no reason that the caller would have used female pronouns. Because when you approached the body initially, you couldn't really tell if it was male or female until it was uncovered. The autopsy on Barbara's body revealed she had been shot in the chest, likely while seated in the passenger side of a vehicle, and that her body had probably been in that alley for approximately 16 hours. There were traces of saliva on her breast, and there was also semen present on the body. The bullet from her body was yet another .25 caliber, and it came from the same gun that had been used to kill Deborah and Henrietta.
Okay. This is starting to seem altogether different than the Southside Slayer. 3 murders completed the same way, very similar, and no strangulation to be seen.
Yeah. Thus, a pattern was established. They were shot in the chest with a .25 caliber semi-automatic while seated in a car, dumped in an alley, and obscured by trash. So I mentioned earlier that they had created a task force in response to the pressure being put on them. But between the two sources, one said the press conference was held in September of 1985, which was a month after Deborah's body was found, and the other said the press conference was after Henrietta's body was found, which would be September 1986. Not exactly sure what to do with that because I couldn't find anything definitive, but whatever. At this point, the task force has definitely been established because it's January 1987, and they had the killer profiled. The use of a small gun indicated that he likely enjoyed the element of surprise and the power that he exerted over them, with them likely not seeing the gun until it was too late, if at all. They wouldn't have seen him as a threat, suggested by the fact that they were in the car with him, and then he viewed women as trash, noted by the way he discarded their bodies. But here's the deal. The task force, which was still reeling from all of the backlash following their press conference, which, just a reminder, the thing that upset the people the most was that they had kept a string of at least 11 murders from the public, decided that their best course of action was to not tell the public about this pattern, or what seemed to be a new serial killer on the prowl.
I don't know what they could have done better.
Yeah. They didn't think it was pertinent information to caution anyone from accepting a ride from a stranger or anything like that. Over the course of the next 18 months...
It's weird because in this instance, I really don't assume malintent, but there is something grossly irresponsible about not disclosing that to the people of the area.
Yeah, I think
especially not the target demographic.
Mm-hmm. Over the course of the next 18 months, 5 more bodies were found, killed and disposed of in very similar fashions to Deborah, Henrietta, and Barbara. Bernita Sparks, 26, shot, beaten, and strangled. Her body left in a trash bin April 15th, 1987. Mary Lowe, 26, left to go to a party, but instead she was found shot. Her body left in an alley covered with trash on October 31st, 1987. Latricia Jefferson, 22, found dead on January 30th, 1988. Inez Warren, 28, shot and left in an alley. Found unconscious August 15th, 1988.
I feel like there is a weird time span between some of these murders. There doesn't seem to be a specific interval.
I think by the end, it'll make sense.
Okay.
Inez succumbed to her injuries after being taken to a hospital. She was not originally linked to the rest of these victims, probably since she was left alive and not covered.
Was she dumped?
Yeah, she was shot and left in an alley.
Okay, I guess I'm getting a little confused. In terms of MO, all of these victims that you've named off, were they dumped after they'd been killed?
Most of them.
Okay. Inez for sure was not. Well, she was dropped off, but she was not. Was she placed in trash? Was trash placed around her?
I don't know that for sure.
I wonder if that means that the murderer was in some kind of rush, or maybe there was some kind of... Anyway, I'm just trying to put the pieces together.
Right. Monique Alicia Alexander, 18, found dead on September 11th, 1988, after leaving the house to go to the store. Alicia was the youngest member of her family, and her father recalled that she was outgoing and she enjoyed archery and ice skating.
18 is so young.
Quite.
And given what you've just shared, she doesn't strike, and that sounds terrible, but she doesn't strike me as someone who would be involved in sex work yet.
Who fits this profile?
Yeah.
Yeah. November 30th, 1988, Anitra, Enietra, 7 letters and 3 vowels.
I was about to say, that's more than 6 letters.
Anitra Washington, 30, was walking to her friend's house to attend a party, and she saw this orange and white Ford Pinto.
Was she duck walking? Dumb. Okay, I'm sorry.
I loved it. You better walk that duck. The driver noticed her and engaged her in conversation about the car. They're just chatting, and he offers to drive her to her friend's house to save her some time. She doesn't really think much of him. She said he was dressed like a geek who had just gotten off work, although it's possible that I misheard that because for some reason the captions weren't registering for that line.
Mm-hmm.
But she said it pretty plainly, so I'm pretty sure that was what she said. Anyway, she declined the offer, but he, from what I can tell, made some sort of jab about her snubbing him or whatnot. And so maybe to prove him wrong, she ultimately accepted the ride.
Oh my God. Talk about getting goaded into it.
Yeah. And a lot of that was me taking like the story that she told.
Okay.
But I kind of added to it a little bit to make it make sense.
Okay.
Shocking. So he's taking her to her friend's house, but he said he needs to swing by his uncle's to pick up some money first. They pull up to a house. He goes inside. He comes back out after a short period of time. They pull away. After he returned to the car, she noticed that there'd been a shift in his demeanor. They were chatting and the radio was on, so she didn't hear something he said clearly. And he became perturbed when she asked him to repeat it. His agitation was apparently due to his perception of Anitra dogging him out. And then they maybe exchanged some words. And then he shot her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she said everything went quiet and she felt this heat in her chest and she lost consciousness. She faded in and out of consciousness a few times.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
One time when she came to, he was sexually assaulting her. She faded back out. And when she came to again, she noticed lights flashing in her face and she realized he was photographing her.
Ugh.
Are you processing or you want me to continue?
Well, I'm just thinking if he's photographing her and he's responsible for the other murders, he's probably done a very similar or same set of actions, or at least I would think so. And I'm curious, was there any evidence of any of the other victims being sexually assaulted?
Some of them were. But it's not 100% clear to me in my research which ones were and which ones weren't.
It also makes me wonder if the photography element was something that was introduced in this case specifically as a way to add a layer of what he might view as humiliation because he felt rejected by her, or if that was something that spans across all of the murders. And I guess that I will eventually find out when we get to the end.
You certainly will. She then tried to get out of the car. So when she got the door open, he shoved her out and drove off.
From how you've described him, he seems more meticulous than that.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say on
Right,
that.
but like that's right. Yeah. Don't you agree?
Well,
at least more planned out.
There's a discrepancy between he's killing women and then covering them with trash, and then also he's shooting some and leaving them for dead, but not waiting for them to die.
Yeah, there's something that's just not quite adding up in my brain.
Just shoving them out of the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something that does come up again. I don't know that I included it, but there were a couple other instances, I want to say, where somebody was shoved out of a vehicle. Okay. Fortunately, she recognized where she was, and she was not far from a friend's house. And she was able to muster the strength to get herself there, where she collapsed on the porch.
After she'd been shot and sexually assaulted and pushed out of the car?
Yep.
Any idea how close the friend's house was?
I actually don't know.
Because I'm like, I couldn't have made it, more than an eighth of a mile.
It is crazy to me that she was going in and out of consciousness and was able to get herself there after the damage in her body had already progressed.
Yeah. Wow. And remind me what her name is again?
Anitra.
Talk about perseverance, a will to live, a will to continue, smart and quick thinking.
Yeah. Some people in the case called her Anitria, but the R is not before the I, and I was not going to not call her Anitra.
Okay.
Obviously. We're duck walkers over here. Her friend called emergency services, telling them that her friend was dying on her porch, and she was rushed to the hospital where she underwent surgery that saved her life. According to the doctor, the bullet had ricocheted off her sternum and amazingly not hit anything vital. And the bullet was fired from the same weapon that had killed Deborah, Henrietta, Barbara, Bernita, Mary, Latricia, Inez, and Alicia. Once Anitra is stable and alert, the police want to talk to her because she has invaluable information. She's able to give them a description of her attacker. A man in his 20s with dark, pockmarked skin, which she described to a sketch artist, and told them he was driving an orange and white Ford Pinto. That's the scene of the crime, so they want to find it. The car sounds really distinctive. It's got to be easy to find. They sift through DMV records and nothing.
And all of Los Angeles, no orange and white Pinto. That's hard to believe.
I suppose. I know why they couldn't find it, so.
Okay.
It's not really explicitly stated, but I know, so.
You always do.
Stop it. Anitra gives them the location of the house that she was taken to when he stopped by his uncle's, and so they stake the house out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a month. They watched this house.
And nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, I knew you were going to tell me nothing.
No orange and white Pinto.
Any Pintos at all?
No. They grew frustrated because they knew that Anitra had provided them with a good amount of information, yet they still were coming up with nothing. Also, they were still sharing nothing with the public, including the rendering of Anitra's attacker, despite her working with a sketch artist.
Now, why were they waiting for that?
I don't know. Neither does Anitra. She was big mad about it.
Crowdsource the information you have. Find the killer in this shit.
Literally.
That is wild. You have a full fucking sketch.
Yeah. And then the case grew cold.
Until
Princess Bartholomew was born August 13th, 1986, the day after Henrietta Wright's body was discovered.
Wait, she was born?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
On March 19th, 2002, at 15, the strangled nude body of Princess was found. She had entered foster care at 3 after suffering unspeakable violence at the hands of her father. She was taken in by David and Dolores Smart. Dolores, who was a retired nurse and really adept at helping foster children overcome their backgrounds.
Wow.
Princess would wake up screaming at night, clearly traumatized from her life before living with the Smarts. Dolores and David saw to it that Princess got a private school education and therapy.
Oh, wow.
To work through her trauma.
And this was late 90s, early 2000s. Well, I guess early 90s to late 90s.
It would have been probably 89, 90 that she went to live with them because she was 3.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like she was well cared for.
Absolutely, she was. They lived in an affluent area.
I would love to live in an affluent area.
Yeah, it would probably mean something about my income.
What?
It would mean that I was making good money.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that time that... Anyway, editor, cut that.
Yeah, editor, get to fucking work.
Damn. It's okay when I say it. It's not okay when you say it.
It's not okay when I give the editor directions. That's fair. I have not heard how the rest of this plays out yet. I'm devastated that Princess had escaped the situation, had escaped the fate of a lot of these women in terms of the life she got to live and the help she was provided and the care she was provided. And I assume that she was not likely on her way to having to engage in sex work or anything of that nature. Am I wrong?
She lived with the couple for about 7 or 8 years before tragedy befell the Smarts.
Okay.
Dolores died suddenly, and after that, when David's health began to decline, Samara Herard, Princess's sister, who was, from what I can tell, another foster child of the Smarts, took over the care of Princess, who she recalled never declined an opportunity to entertain her young son. But Samara was in college and had children, and Princess being added to the mix was not sustainable. So while she had spent very formative years being nurtured and cared for in the affluent town of Claremont, she was suddenly ripped away from all that, everything that she had known, and placed back into foster care. And this child, who had attended private schools and been given anything her heart had desired, was all of a sudden placed in a home in the middle of a neighborhood that did not have much in common with the neighborhood she had grown up in.
Wow.
Who knows what she may have endured during her time in this new home, because she ended up running away right around December 21st, 2001.
Okay. How old was she at that time?
15.
Oh, this poor girl. Okay, and what happened next?
July 11th, 2003, 35-year-old Valerie McCorvey's body was discovered. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and left in an alleyway.
Now, Valerie sounds older than the rest of the women that had been... Also, this is a huge gap in time. We went from 88 to 2002?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Valerie had been working on getting clean, motivated by wanting to do right by her offspring, when she was killed. January 1st, 2007, 25-year-old Genesia Peters' body was discovered shot in the back and covered with a garbage bag in the exact same dumpster that Bernita's body had been dumped. She had a young son and was working on overcoming addiction. She'd recently enrolled in school to study computer science. It was determined later that she had been alive when her killer had zip-tied her into the garbage bag. Her cause of death was asphyxiation, despite having been shot.
And it was a garbage bag?
Yes. The zip tie used to secure the garbage bag was preserved as evidence, since apparently often zip ties are held in the mouth while twisting the top of a trash bag.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it did come back with DNA that positively matched Valerie, Princess, and the cases from the 80s.
Okay. But still no match in the system.
Well,
no named person associated with that DNA.
We're going to get there. You're definitely on the right track of this investigation, but there are things standing in the way of finding information using those methodologies.
Okay.
With the return of this killer, they revisited the cold case file, reviewing everything in it. The detectives, who at this point are looking for any lead, realized that they needed to talk to Anitra again.
Okay.
Anitra was, as I mentioned, less than pleased with the way that they had handled the case in 1988. She especially did not understand why she had worked with a sketch artist if the composite was never going to be made public.
Right. Well, and now this perpetrator is going to look different than they did in 1988.
That is true. So with the confirmed return of the same killer who had prowled the streets of South Central Los Angeles 2 decades prior, a journalist had an inside source, so she was able to secure an interview with one of the detectives on the case. He met with her, but didn't learn until later that she was also getting information leaked from someone in the coroner's office.
Oh.
After writing her copy, the editor directed her to give this killer a name. And so, due to his seeming hiatus between 1988 and 2001 and 2002, she dubbed him the Grim Sleeper in an issue of LA Weekly published August 27th, 2008.
Wow. The Grim Sleeper.
Mm-hmm. Now that he had been named in the media, billboards were put up around LA with the composite and age progressed composites.
Oh my God, they could have done that so much sooner.
Yeah, well.
They could have done that so much sooner. When does Rodney King happen?
That was in the 90s.
So they were just maybe busy in the interim fighting rampant racism.
It's interesting that you mentioned Rodney
force.
King, because that's going to be a little bit relevant, but I didn't include it. But it does kind of get touched on when I talk about something later on. It's my understanding that these billboards had composites, but they also had pictures of the victims on them. Obviously, they knew their guy was at least in his 40s by now. And in a time where it was considered a lot of money to have a $10,000 reward for information, the reward amount for information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of the Grim Sleeper was $500,000.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they were a little bit more motivated this time around.
Yeah. And I want to point out, they mention basically everywhere that at this point, they were finally able to start working on cold cases because they weren't just constantly putting out fires anymore.
Okay.
So they finally had gotten a lot of the crime, the drugs, all of that under control. And all of a sudden, that sketch looked like everyone's neighbor and every person Facebook suggested they may know.
So a lot of dark complected, pockmarked men.
Yeah, they looked like that sketch, and like that $500,000 was mine, please, thank you.
Yeah. How tall was the perpetrator? Did they have an estimate?
No. More than 800 tips came in, and they all led nowhere.
Ugh. What, in a matter of days, hours, weeks, months?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Earlier that year, in April 2008, California authorized the use of DNA testing that would show familial matches. And so detectives were like, hey, we should have his DNA run to find family members.
And was that against what was already like in the CODIS database?
Yes.
Okay.
So that turned up nothing. Their serial killer and any close male relatives had never been entered into CODIS. It was still relatively new, and so the database was growing at a rapid rate. I think it said exponentially. In 2010, one of the detectives working the case happened to run into the woman who had originally run the Grim Sleeper's DNA in 2008. Nearly 2 years had passed since she'd tried, so she figured she'd give it another go. And finally, they have a match that brings us back to the start of this case, the weekend of the 4th of July. 20-year-old Christopher Franklin is arrested and pleads guilty to a felony, which required that his DNA be put into CODIS. Obviously, he is too young to be the Grim Sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
But his father, Lonnie, was the right age and lived right in the center of the Grim Sleeper's hunting ground. Lonnie Franklin Jr. grew up in a loving and nurturing home with 2 parents and a younger sister. He was in South Central LA for the majority of his life. His family had ended up in Los Angeles because in the 40s, there was substantial growth for blue-collar employment opportunities. So many Black families, particularly from the South, flocked to LA with the hopes of finding jobs that would allow them to provide for their families, with the added bonus of fleeing Jim Crow South.
Right.
At a young age, Lonnie showed an interest in cars. So his dad nurtured this and taught him about cars, fixing cars. He taught him to drive at 7.
Painting cars, chopping up cars, stealing cars, changing your vehicles out.
Cars he was good at. But it turns out school was a different story. He struggled academically, but also socially because he was not super tall. He carried some extra weight, and children are cruel. At 14, he got his very first car and would cruise around the neighborhood. Right around this time, tensions were really high between the Black populace of LA and the police. August 11th through 16th of 1965, when Lonnie would have been just shy of 13, the Watts riots took place.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to tell me more about those?
A little bit. I will say that they were the worst riots until Rodney King. So here's a quick overview of the Watts riots. Marquette Fry, a 22-year-old man, was pulled over on suspicion of drunk driving. He did not pass the sobriety test, and when the officer went to arrest him, after other people had kind of joined the fray. So his brother's a passenger in the car, goes to get his mom. She comes back. She's mad. Everybody's mad. Things are obviously heated because he was so close to home. And so when the officers went to arrest him, he resisted. The altercation drew a crowd of onlookers, and police ratcheted up the violence. Marquette seems to have been struck in the face with a baton, and several sources said that allegedly a police officer kicked a woman who was pregnant. And it seems that that was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back, because all hell broke loose for 6 days.
Oh.
Rioters protesting police brutality, employment discrimination, poverty, and residential segregation set fire to buildings and destroyed property to the tune of $40 million.
Oh, wow. In the 1960s.
Mm-hmm. The California Army National Guard was called in, and a curfew was enacted. Suffice it to say, witnessing this level of violence and this distrust of the police at the pivotal age of 13 or 14 might shape your worldview some. Lonnie transferred to a school in Compton that was considered to be a good school, and so his parents felt this was promising. I mentioned that he loved cars, so it shouldn't surprise you at all that at 16 he was arrested on 2 separate occasions for grand theft auto.
Wow, he really, really liked cars.
Yeah.
He just had like a real love for them.
Mm-hmm. At 17, he was arrested for burglary. And before graduating high school, he got into a fight that resulted in his expulsion. He went to work for a few years at a grocery store before enlisting in the Army in 1971.
Lonnie is making interesting choices.
Yeah, just wait. He was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany, which was great because he viewed the Army as a means of getting to see the world. He was doing well. He worked his way up to kitchen supervisor within the span of 6 months. But somehow he was still managing to find time to exhibit deviant behavior. In April 1974, Lonnie and 2 soldier buddies kidnapped a 17-year-old girl named Ingrid from a tram stop.
Mm-hmm. Were they military buddies?
Mm-hmm. They gang raped her at knife point, Lonnie's knife, of course. He took photographs of her, and when Lonnie was driving her home afterwards, traumatized, she began to put on a show, hoping that Lonnie would take the bait and believe she was interested in him. With all of the arrogance of a straight man, he did in fact buy her act and asked her if she wanted his number when he dropped her off. She took it straight to the police.
Ingrid, you're smart. You're a smart one.
Ingrid is a badass.
Absolutely.
No. You wait. Ingrid is a badass.
Okay.
The police suggested they set up a sting operation. So she called Lonnie and asked him to go out on a date months after the attack, and he agreed. And so he showed up. So did the police. And then they took him in, charged him with assault. And December 20th, 1974, he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison.
Oh, wow. German prison?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He served a portion of this sentence, was dishonorably discharged from the Army, and landed himself back in the same area of LA that he had grown up in.
And what about his friends?
I don't know anything about that. I think that they were all prosecuted, but I don't know for sure.
I want them to have all been prosecuted.
Yeah. Well, then we'll say they were. Well, if they weren't, I don't want to
We just tell facts here at Until the End of Crime. It's just
all right. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you never.
Your true crime besties would never lead you astray. We would never say anything that's not 100% factually true.
I would never add details to a story to make it make more sense.
Yeah, never would she. Never would she try to fill in the blank places, the blank spaces.
I need it to make sense.
Oh, good. I'm glad we're keeping it factual.
This is not a factual podcast.
For entertainment purposes only.
Strictly. So he's back in South Central LA, but the area was changing. Now that the corporations who had provided so many families with opportunity and blue-collar jobs, they were taking this work elsewhere. They could get as much or more work for less money. So, greed won. And these families were left high and dry, looking for ways to bring in money. Crack cocaine has entered the chat. Dealing drugs was one way that they were able to generate income for themselves. Mm-hmm. Hence the crime epidemic that LA was facing in the mid to late 80s. Speaking of crime, Lonnie was free as a bird, not only because he had been released from prison, but also because he had no adult convictions in the U.S. So despite having a violent criminal past, he didn't have any record of it.
That's crazy. The military wasn't like, oh, let's put this shit down somewhere.
No, the military likes to investigate their own crimes. Thank you very much. They want to keep it out of the...
That's true.
In the late 70s, Lonnie met 21-year-old Sylvia Castillo from Belize. She was a principal who cared for the elderly in the neighborhood in addition to overseeing a school, which meant she worked a lot. The two got married, and in 1978, they had a daughter named Crystal, and their son, Christopher, was born in 1981. Sylvia wasn't the only one who gave back to her community and neighborhood. Everyone seemed to love Lonnie, and they loved that he could get him a good price on things. You need a TV? Lonnie can get you one. He worked on cars and was just always willing to help out his neighbors.
Doesn't sound like a bad guy. Too bad we know he raped someone at knife point.
Yeah. After the birth of their son, he got an official job working on cars at a shop that worked on LAPD cars. A year later, when an opportunity arose for a higher paying job, he took it and began working for LA Sanitation, collecting garbage.
Okay.
The couple worked all week, and on the weekends they'd have barbecues, and they just seemed like the typical middle-class family. At some point, Lonnie claims that he sustained an injury to his right arm while on the job, and he was...
At the garbage?
Yeah.
Sanitation pickup?
Yes.
Okay.
Which forced him to go on leave.
Right. I'm interested to hear how his time in sanitation influenced his MO. And it begs the question, did Lonnie discover dead bodies among debris and trash? Did he realize that was a good hiding spot? Did he realize that was a way to ensure that the body would be found? Was he trying to humiliate sex workers? Was he trying to humiliate any woman after what happened to him in Germany? Did he always feel incredibly, impotent wouldn't be the right word, but shunned, unworthy, less than, inadequate?
At least some of those questions will be answered.
God knows, I don't even know how many questions I just posed.
Okay, Chanel.
What does Chanel say?
When she interviews Tori Spelling and she asks her all of those questions.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Wait, was that an All Stars 1? No,
it was season 1.
Okay.
While on leave, his family doesn't know this, but he's still working on local cars, helping out people in the neighborhood to make some money.
When you say helping out, is he doing illegal activities for or with others?
He's working on cars primarily, but also if you need a TV, Lonnie's the guy you go to. They didn't really know if he was breaking the law to get them the good price on the TV, but he probably was, is what everything suggested.
They didn't care.
They didn't care. They were getting a good price on the TV.
Honestly, I kind of get it.
I know.
I would love an 8K TV right now.
How much are you willing to pay?
Lonnie prices.
Oh, shit.
But I don't want to buy from a Lonnie.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you know, if anyone out there that's listening wants to make my 8K dreams come true, actually, don't even worry about it because my little Apple TV only goes up to 4K.
All right. We've
a 4K projector.
We've resolved this, and we still are on the right path to end crime, not engage in crime.
Right. Absolutely. But if you're writing out your bitch list and there's someone who has a 4K projector and you're like, how do I get back at them? I'm here.
I'm just going to take a moment to mention that we do not advocate theft, robbery, acting on a bitch list.
No, but if you come across one.
All right.
Obviously in jest. We don't support crime.
Yeah. I think you're going to find this next part interesting because in working on cars, he had access to a variety of vehicles. He would flip them, get parts from them, replace the license plates with stolen license plates, and then he'd get rid of the cars.
Chop them up.
Or sell them. With the arm injury, he tried to file for disability, but something about the situation felt off. So the police start investigating this arm injury.
Wait, police investigate disability claims?
Yeah, so look, you know that the details throughout this entire case are questionable at best.
Your case has inspired a lot of questions today.
Yeah, same. So either they're trying to figure out if this is a legitimate injury, or they're looking into him for fraud because he tried to file multiple claims.
Oh, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The one source that had this information wasn't 100% clear, so I don't know how I could possibly be expected to be. Around the time he would be out patrolling for victims, the kids would have been in elementary school. So after they'd go to bed, he'd go out prowling.
Where's his wife?
At home.
With the kids?
Yeah. The cops later wondered if Lonnie ever slept because from what they could tell, he wouldn't have had time to.
I don't know. He's the grim sleeper.
Well, because of the sleeping period. Speaking of, it's mentioned in a sensationalized way that he took a break from murdering between 1988 and 2002, but that isn't necessarily so. There are several deaths that might be attributed to him between 1991 and 2000. Plus, there's a question of whether or not he's responsible for deaths in Belize, since Sylvia's from there. Eyewitnesses have placed him there, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Why might a serial killer pull back on committing murders? He could have been incarcerated. But I'll tell you now, Lonnie wasn't. Major life events can alter their ability or desire, such as marriage, having a baby, and so on. A disability. What they're able to piece together in retrospect is around the late 80s and early 90s, Lonnie isn't as helpful or friendly as he had been before. Neighbors notice how strict he was being with Christopher, and Sylvia isn't around as much as she used to be, and there's speculation that their marriage was maybe going through a rough patch during this time. Maybe she was sick of him leaving the house at night. It's hard to say, really.
I'm worried that you're going to tell me that he's sexually assaulting his children.
I am not going to say that.
Okay.
I'm not ruling out that he was violent with them, but nothing said that.
Okay.
Not a ton of information is available on this, but he was described as being withdrawn. I have to assume compared to his behavior before. Mm-hmm. Also, he's gotten himself into a touch of legal trouble for burglary, non-fatal assaults, possession of a firearm, and he even spent several months in county for grand theft auto, because damn, he does love cars.
He loves some cars. Just call him Mater, because he's towing those bitches. He is in it.
Not Mater.
I should have never drug Pixar animation. Wait, are they Pixar?
Yeah, Disney Pixar.
Yeah, he loves a car.
Mm-hmm.
He loves a car, man. Why did his wife not leave him? She was a principal?
She was a principal.
Listen, I'm not assigning any blame to this woman. I am not assigning any blame to her. But I just, it kind of goes back to the conversation we had when we talked about Ana Maria Gonzalez Angulo. Yes. And George Blumenschein, and you and I had that conversation about being held to a higher standard and operating in a way that is above reproach.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that being a principal is difficult if your husband is a felon.
Yeah, he had no felonies though.
Grand Theft Auto is not a felony?
He just had to do months in the county jail. He never went to prison.
But that's not a felonious crime?
I don't know that he had felonious charges pressed on him.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe. What do I know? I know
Or maybe
nothing.
I'm thinking like larceny.
Maybe.
Grand larceny.
So I want to remind you that she is an immigrant and she is from Belize. So we've got a couple things at play that could inform her staying with him. Well, it could be cultural. It could be a number of things. So
did she have her own citizenship?
I'm not sure. I mean, she was a principal at 21, or she went on to be a principal. I don't really know. I have no clue. Look, not a lot of information on Sylvia. She's not the responsible party.
Okay. I won't blame it on you.
We're going to leave her out of it a little bit, as much as we can. Lonnie is aware that he's on law enforcement's radar, so he's laying low, or at least lower.
Low Lonnie.
Yeah. Despite these crimes, none of them have ever risen to the level of a crime that would require his DNA be collected. Up to this point, it was murder, sexual assault, and assault causing severe injury or something like that. Those are the only three that would get a DNA swabby on the file.
Okay.
A DNA swabby on the file. What am I saying?
I was ready to accept it.
All right. We accept it. Speaking of collecting Lonnie's DNA, back in 2010, they've got the match to his son, so they start staking out Lonnie. They had eyes on him 24/7, just like when they had staked out the house before that Anitra had told them he had taken her to, 3 doors down from his own house. So I'm not sure if this was just a Franken edit or if the detective giving the interview was confusing details from decades prior, but he said they tailed Lonnie 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He really made it sound like this was weeks-long endeavor. So we're going to put a pin in that. They're waiting for an opportunity to get something with DNA that Lonnie would discard, which landed them at a pizza parlor. He went there to celebrate a birthday, and he was there with the birthday group for about 3 hours. One of the detectives talks to the manager, gives them the rundown of the situation, and asks if they can bust that table. The manager was like, yeah, absolutely. So this detective was just the most attentive busboy you ever did see. He's bussing constantly. Someone sets down a napkin with gloved hands. He places it into a bin. Lonnie discards a napkin with gloved hands. He places that into a separate bin. Hours, he's collecting everyone's stuff in one bin, and then Lonnie is in another bin, which is how the lab was able to swab DNA off of a piece of pizza Lonnie had bitten into. And in 32 hours, they are able to confirm that it was a match to the murderer. Lonnie Franklin Jr. was the grim sleeper who had eluded capture for 25 years.
Wow.
Not just eluded capture. That makes it sound like he got away, like he still committed crimes throughout that 25 years as well.
It also makes it sound like he's some kind of genius megamind. And I don't know if I think that's the case.
Right.
I think he got really lucky over and over again.
I agree. So on July 7th or July 10th, 4 to 7 days.
Did none of these people agree on anything? Did all of these docuseries say, hey, let's do shit a little different for each episode?
Docuseries, and then now because it's more recent, I'm also getting into articles. So I'm just adding more discrepancies in.
Did he look like his composite sketch?
Well, we talked about this last episode. I don't know that if I answer that you'll agree.
That's true. Did you see a comparison of the two, though?
Not a comparison of the two, no.
Okay.
The only pictures I saw of him was when he was older. And then the composite, I would not personally be like twins, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So July 7th or 10th, 4 or 7 days after they got the hit on Chris's DNA as a familial match, which is why I put a pin in them saying we were 24/7. And I was like, you were there 24, maybe 7 at most. It was just a few days between the two. Like, what are we doing here? They descend upon Lonnie's home, serve him with the warrant for his arrest and search warrant for his home. When they approach him, as he casually leans on his car, they tell him he's being arrested for murder. And he says, murder? Oh, okay.
I thought you were going to say murder. I hardly know her.
Damn, that was a missed opportunity. His neighbors are stunned. No one would suspect this man to be violent or capable of murder, let alone a string of murders spanning decades and maybe countries.
Were they really surprised? Was Sylvia surprised?
They were surprised. I saw interviews from his neighbors. They were surprised.
But what about his wife?
There's still not a lot of information available on her.
Wow, so nothing magically appeared on your screen since I last asked?
There are several spaces throughout the house that seem to be Lonnie's, such as an office, possibly a bedroom, and what looked to me like a garage that he used as a workshop. More than 600 pieces of evidence were cataloged, but it was in Lonnie's workshop that the search uncovered over 1,000 Polaroid pictures of women. All of whom seemed to be unaware that they were being photographed, many of whom appeared to be unconscious.
And had bullet holes in their chest?
Some of them, I can confirm, did. After the collection of Polaroids are found, there's a lot of concern that maybe there are a lot more victims than detectives are aware of. They find a picture of Anitra in the passenger seat of a Ford Pinto with a gunshot wound, exactly as she described.
Mm-hmm.
She confirms that the image is her. 180 of the pictures that were found that the police were unable to identify were published in hopes that someone would come forward and say, "That's my sister, we haven't seen her in years," or better yet, "That's me." A man saw these pictures in the newspaper, where most of the women were presumed to be dead, and recognized his granddaughter, Lawana Wilson. He gave Lawana's mom a call, told her about seeing her daughter in the newspaper, and she's like, "What the hell have you gotten yourself into, Lawana?" and showed her the picture. Lawana recognized the dress she was wearing in the photo as one her cousin gave her, and she also recognized it to the point that it triggered a traumatic memory, which was when she was 14 years old, she was sexually assaulted in a gray minivan and dumped in a U-Haul truck. Lawana never told anyone about the sexual assault, trying to repress the memory and turning to drugs as a means of coping with it. As she put it, the sexual assault led to the drugs, which led to an addiction, which led to mental health issues, which led to homelessness, which led to sex work and sex trafficking. She had a rule for herself that she wouldn't get in the car with anyone who she felt was sketchy, but she acknowledged that she was not always successful in that endeavor. I don't have a lot of details on how we got here, but 5 years later, Lonnie sexually assaulted her again, and she knew it was the same man as before, so she knew he was a local guy, but she didn't know anyone who knew him, so she was never able to get very far with getting his name or getting information about him.
Yeah.
Her grandfather, seeing her pictures in connection with Lonnie's crimes, then dropped a bombshell on her. They were related to one another.
Lonnie and Lawana?
Yes, that's the only thing that was said. So I don't know how they were related, but...
And what about the other 180 women? Or I guess 179?
I don't know.
Nothing?
I don't know. I'm not saying nothing. I don't know.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
That's genuinely...
180 because they couldn't ID those, but
Yeah.
there were over 1,000. On TV, the news had broken about the capture of Lonnie Franklin, and the names of victims that were connected to him were revealed, which is how Diana Ware learned that her stepdaughter, whose father had since died, had been the victim of a serial killer. She gave Precinct 77 a ring and said, "What the hell?" And they said, "Oh my goodness, we've been trying to get in touch with you." And Diana said, and I am paraphrasing, "Get out of here with that bullshit. You knew how to get in touch with me," because she and her late husband had made sure of that. And she hadn't even been aware that they were actively working on this case again. After arresting Lonnie, they naturally interrogated him. He's cool as a cucumber and even arrogant. They show him pictures of each of the known victims that they have linked to him with DNA and the use of the same weapon. He doesn't know these women. That one is butt ugly. That one is heavy set. I have no clue how my DNA would have gotten on any of these women. I didn't kill them.
Weird position to take when you have all those photographs in your workshop and your DNA is there and they're telling you that, but you literally had photos on your person.
I'm going to counter that. Claiming that you didn't kill any women, but then taking the time to also insult them is also a weird position.
I mean, I guess it's all a little weird.
Yeah. But our cool little cucumber realized that he had gotten himself into a pickle.
Oh my God. Our cool little cucumber got himself into a pickle. I guess he just fell into a vat of brine. Oh my God. Any idea if it was a sweet and spicy bread and butter, regular old deal?
I don't know.
Kosher?
It's the level of sophistication of the jokes that really
the comedic stylings
elevates me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I say we wrap it up. How are you going to top that? Hang up the hat on the whole podcast.
Give me some time.
Wow. You know, I'm going to start trying to add some of those puns into my own cases so that you have something to laugh at.
Okay. I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Should I take that line again?
They won't. It'll never be as funny as this one.
I mean.
No, I don't think there's any reason to take it again. I think that
I didn't even finish the sentence.
Okay. Take it. Do it again. Obviously, you have to leave everything in.
But our cool little cucumber realized that he had gotten himself into a pickle when they brought out the picture of Anitra Washington because she had survived. And Lonnie had no clue that any of the victims he had shot had lived. He requested an attorney at that point.
Oh.
He still didn't have anything to do with them, but he wanted an attorney. Just some interesting things to note. The house Anitra had taken the police to, that they ended up staking out for over a month, like I said, was only 3 doors from Lonnie's home. One of the billboards that was put up with the age-progressed composite sketch was only 2 blocks from his house. And every time the police canvassed Lonnie's neighborhood, he just so happened to not be there. So they had never, in the decades that these murders went unsolved, spoken to him in connection with this case.
Cameron, that seems crazy.
I know.
That seems unbelievable.
I know.
Certainly improbable.
Very improbable.
Okay, I guess I'll suspend my disbelief.
All of the bodies were dumped along the route he collected trash from when he worked for LA Sanitation.
Okay, what did the police need? A clue board?
They were aware that he lived in the area. But yeah, I mean,
no one thought about, I guess to be fair, I didn't think about trash routes until just now, but I was asking questions about fucking trash.
When hindsight is 2020.
Oh my God. And I guess he just got so many people good deals on TVs. They were like, we're not going to snitch his ass out 2 blocks from me.
And again, I did not personally think that the composite sketch was.
But do you ever?
You're right. I'm too particular. The guy in the composite sketch looked like he had an elongated face, and Lonnie's face is very distinctly round.
Yeah. Okay.
So they interviewed Sylvia. I know you've been chomping at the bit to learn about Sylvia. And she had seemed unaware of Lonnie's nighttime drives, which does kind of lend some credence to them having their own bedrooms. The detectives who'd been staking out their home noticed that late at night, he'd go driving around the neighborhood, chatting with women. And this is, I think, all I know about Sylvia. So she took everything they told her in stride.
What does that mean?
She handled all of the news well.
I mean, was she suspicious at all? Sorry.
I even prefaced it with
I
don't know anything else.
I know. But that doesn't even, I would have a really hard time taking it in stride if I had not already thought that maybe he was up to something.
So I think what happened is she took the information that the police were telling her at face value. They said that she was a very nice lady. They also, I think, spared some of the details and spared some questions because they didn't want to embarrass her. So,
sir, you're working a fucking crime.
Several many crimes. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't think it matters if you offend someone's sensibilities when you're working on how many different cases of murder, of sexual assault.
It's why I said that I am not ruling out the idea that he was violent with his family.
Is my takeaway from today's case supposed to be to hate the LAPD?
No.
Does it make sense how I would get there?
Yeah, I do talk about a little bit of that because the biggest plot twist of them all, you're not the first person to kind of point fingers at the LAPD's role that they played in all of this happening.
Okay.
So during the trial, which I believe did not begin until 2016, Lonnie was so disinterested in the proceedings that he brought a romance novel to read.
That's crazy. That's crazy. He was so disinterested, he brought a romance novel to read.
Mm-hmm. Reporters were there. Victims and victims' families were there.
So he was ready to go to prison.
I don't know. But no one was there to support Lonnie. His wife and children never once made an appearance.
Good.
I just think that it adds to my theory that they probably knew what he was capable of because they lived with him behind closed doors.
Right.
Diana Ware went every single day to court to represent her late husband, and because she wanted it to be known that Barbara mattered. February 25th, 2016, Anitra took the stand, and she calmly but assuredly looked at Lonnie, pointed at him, and identified him as her rapist and the man who attempted to kill her. His defense went a little something like this. Lonnie is innocent. These murders were committed probably by someone else, maybe even several other people, but not Lonnie. Okay. And about that junk science, this DNA stuff, the prosecution mentioned, heed that not, because it was probably just some nephew of Lonnie's. No further questions. I rest my case.
Oh, he does not know how DNA works. Or he does not care.
Well, his defense attorney, I think, was just grasping for anything.
That's so crazy.
During the trial, a vocal analyst testified that Lonnie was likely the caller who sent police to Barbara's body and the van at the church. He was charged with 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Had they, since 2010, definitively linked him to more murder victims? Yes. Did they press charges for those crimes? No.
Is it because they wanted to make sure they could get him if the first 10 didn't work out?
It was, what's the difference if he's already on trial for murder and going to get life without the possibility of parole or the death penalty? What is 4 or 5 more charges?
Right.
The difference to me, because when I heard that statement made, something inside of me lit up, is that those women who never legally received justice, and maybe man in one case, are unnamed in their own story.
Yeah.
That's what it matters to me. But
they also deserve justice.
Right. He was found guilty on all 11 charges, and during the sentencing phase, victims' families gave impact statements, while victims of Lonnie's testified, including Ingrid. She came from Germany to testify about the first known violent crime Lonnie committed.
Wow.
I told you she was badass. He was sentenced to death.
Again, not a proponent of the death sentence typically, but in this instance, I'm not going to mourn the wicked.
On March 28th, 2020, at 67 years of age, Lonnie was found dead in his cell.
Oh.
There were no signs of trauma to his body, and although the cause of death has never been revealed, it was allegedly natural causes.
So much better than what he deserved.
Yeah, but maybe it was COVID.
Yeah.
End of March 2020 in a prison.
That makes sense.
Late 60s. A criminal profiler for the FBI, Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, said that the attack on Ingrid was possibly where violence and eroticism became interwoven for Lonnie, and that once that connection has been established, it's impossible to untangle it. He believed he was smarter than law enforcement, and discarding the bodies with trash had a twofold purpose. First, and probably most obvious, it is telling of how he feels about them,
Mm-hmm.
but also he wanted their bodies to be found. It's a game with law enforcement, calling the dispatcher and sending them to a church. All of it adds to the excitement and to his ego. Some of the evidence that I didn't get into before is they found 3 guns at his home, one of which was the .25 caliber that ballistics established was the same gun that had been used in the murders in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They found women's jewelry and clothing, which he had kept as trophies. They also found driver's licenses. Some of the bodies of the women and the licenses he was found in possession of were never located. It is speculated that they could have ended up in landfills. At least 6 people are believed to have been killed during what they say was a 14-year hiatus, but those 2 ideas are contradictory because if he's killing 6 people during a hiatus, then it isn't a hiatus.
Yeah, they are, in fact, mutually exclusive.
Right. All of his victims were women of color, with the exception of one man who they weren't able to find enough evidence to charge Lonnie for killing. They just suspect that he had probably found out about Lonnie's crimes. He was killed, I think, 2 days after Henrietta was killed, so maybe he knew about...
So I think it was more likely he was a loose end.
Yes.
Okay.
All victims came from a low economic community at the time of their death. Obviously, conversations arose questioning if this case would have taken as long if the victims were white or from affluent neighborhoods. The detectives countered this point by indicating all of the evidence they collected in the 80s. They staked out the house for a month. He said that they cared, but sometimes some cases just take longer to solve.
Okay, sure, maybe. It's so hard for me to hear and understand how they canvassed and staked out this home that Anitra pointed to for a month, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And just 3 houses down, you never saw anything that you thought was odd, never any kind of sign of the composite sketch man, no kind of sign of a red or an orange and white Pinto. I just think it's the tunnel vision required to only see that one home and not have any kind of perception of the outlying homes or the rest of the neighborhood seems really odd to me.
I am going to say he probably got rid of that car almost immediately.
Sure.
Like before they started staking out near his home.
Sounds like he was someone who cycled through cars frequently.
And did nighttime patrols down the road.
Which feels like something they would have noticed.
Right. Should have.
Like this home has 5 different cars in a month, or this home has a car leaving every day.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, or every other night, or at whatever frequency. If you were there for a month, every day, 24 hours.
Diana does concede that they did try and that they did care. But between 1960 and 1997, LA had 9,000 unsolved homicides. So they were also overwhelmed and weren't able to give all of the cases their due attention. I'm going to do a rundown of the known and suspected victims of Lonnie Franklin Jr. Ingrid Y., 17, 1974. Lawana Wilson, 14 and 19, 1981 and 1986. Suspected victim, Catherine Davis, 32, 1982. Sharon Dismuke, 21, 1984. Deborah Jackson, 29, 1985. Henrietta Wright, 35, 1986. Thomas Steele, 36, 1986. Barbara Ware, 23, 1987. Bernita Sparks, 26, 1987. Mary Lowe, 26, 1987. Latricia Jefferson, 22, 1988. Inez Warren, 28, 1988. Monique Alicia Alexander, 18, 1988. Anitra Washington, 30, 1988. Suspected Rosalind Giles, 26, 1991. Suspected Lisa Knox, 28, 1993. Suspected Anita Parker, 37, 1998. Suspected 5 unnamed women from Belize from 1998 to 2000. Georgia Thomas, 43, 2000. Princess Bartholomew, 15, 2002. Valerie McCorvey, 35, 2003. Ayila Marshall, 18, 2005. Rolenia Morris, 35, 2005. Janicia Peters, 25, 2007. And Edwinta Hereford, 19, 2010, hasn't been ruled out.
29 actual and suspected victims.
Yeah.
That's a significant reign of terror.
They believe that he was one of the most prolific serial killers of our time.
And I've never even heard of him before today.
Yeah. Well, that's the case of the Grim Sleeper. And it turns out that the South Side Slayer was not all the same person. It was like 3 different killers operating in the same area with similar MOs.
Wild.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder how minute the changes or the differences were in those 3 different murderers.
Yeah, I don't know. Those weren't the cases that I covered.
You didn't do auxiliary research?
No, but don't you think that part of the reason that you don't really know about this is the same reason that it probably took so long, the same reason that they weren't connecting things, the same reason that they were attributing 4 different killers to the same killings?
Mm-hmm. So recently, with our most recent election and the barrage of change and actions and executive orders and upheaval in our country, I've been feeling almost radicalized in the way where I am so sick of the constant denigration of norms and respect and equality that I absolutely agree that part of the issue was due to racism, whether it be inherent or apparent, inwards or outwards, subversive or blatant. And I think that it also is in part due to socioeconomic status. I think to ignore the role of race or the role of perceived value or worth monetarily is to negate the truth of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, what a shame that these 29 victims, likely more,
Very likely more,
I'm upset that they didn't all get their due in terms of justice within the court system.
Right.
It feels like another way they were disregarded, another way that they were proven to not matter to the people who they should have. And I think maybe what's sadder still is that you mentioned one woman who created an effort to, her name was Margaret in the 1960s, who established that coalition.
Margaret Prescott.
And that's the only person you were really able to point to as someone who was an advocate. Now, do I think she was the only one? Absolutely not. I think that there were probably lots of community members and family members who worked towards this and who wanted these things to be solved. But based on what you saw and based on what you shared with me today, it doesn't sound like there were a whole lot of people invested in these women and justice for them.
Definitely not people in positions where it would have been recorded that these women had, just like human value placed on them.
Yeah. I think that you brought me a really interesting, thought-provoking, and well-researched case. I think that it makes us deal with uncomfortable questions about the role of race and economic class in policing and investigative work. I think that there is no simple answer for how to avoid this in the future. I'm sure as we speak right now that there are instances and crimes and probably serial murderers who aren't being held accountable because, again, the population is not cared for enough for the appropriate investigations to follow.
Yeah.
But that's my soapbox.
So, 29 victims. And so many of them should have been prevented, but...
Absolutely.
A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a review.
Recommend us to a friend.
And make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram. And grab your friend's phone and make sure they're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out with questions or episode suggestions.
Or just to say hi.
Or for an ad swap or for advertisers.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.